everyone, it's Desiree. We are going to start a new series, and it's going to be techniques, different types of products that we have in our stash, how we can use them, how they function, operate, all that fun stuff. So the first one actually came in. I had asked everyone during my giveaway what they would like to see in techniques. Someone had actually asked about Distress Crayons way before that. So I wanted to launch the technique series with this. So let's look at the Distress Crayons. So you can see they look like a thick marker. You swivel the bottom, the pigment will come up. You reverse it, it'll go back down like a lipstick. They are very creamy. It is a water reactive pigment. Now again, water reactive pigment. There is a very big difference with these. Now, a lot of people like to compare them to gelatos. I do not own gelatos. I'm okay with that, believe it or not. So I'm not going to be comparing them to you. So this video, it's long, but we're going to show you how these operate, how you can work with them, and how you can incorporate them into your cards. Great for art journaling and everything else, but we can use these for card making as well. So you can see, now this is watercolor paper first, Canson XL. So you can see if I put pigment down, I can smudge it. It doesn't smudge a lot. If I draw with it, I don't lose the line when it comes to that, but it will smudge. Now, if I put this pigment down and we use a baby wipe. Now, what I like to do with baby wipes is put them in another towel, really squeeze them to get the majority of the moisture out of the baby wipe. You can see I can really move this. You still see the base of the pigment down, but you can work with it. You can blend these two items together, of course, to create more colors, like I'm doing here, overlap a little bit, but then go back and forth, and you've got to switch your fingers so that you can keep those direct colors. Here's the difference. These dry. These are meant to dry. So you can see I'm rubbing on that other area that I did first. I'm not moving that pigment. If I bring in a spray bottle, now I'm going to spray the one that I just did. You can see some of the pigment is moving, but not a lot. It's not until I put my finger on it that the pigment will move. The ones on the left here were completely dry. The pigment's not moving. It's only until we put our finger to it will that pigment move. So these are meant to dry. So just know that if you put these down first, put something wet on top of them, and if they're not dry, the pigment's going to move. Let's do the same thing on Bristol paper. Some people like watercolor paper, some like Bristol. I am a Bristol fan. I do like the Bristol more so to work on than watercolor, but it all depends again on what I'm doing. So I'm doing the same thing, putting some pigment down, doing the smudge test. It smudges immediately, a little bit more on Bristol because it's a little smoother than watercolor paper. I did the scribble line. It does, again, smooth out a little bit more. And you can see it almost disappears when I use the baby wipe. Again, we can blend on this as well. Just going to use some other colors here. And again, if you go back and forth using each different finger, you can see that you get a blend. I do think that they blend a little bit better on the Bristol paper. Again, if I attack that with water right away, there is some pigment that will move on the blend I just did. I'm looking on that left-hand side where they did dry. I made those up earlier. It's not until I put my finger on them that the pigment is moving. If I just put water on top, the pigment won't move. That is what they're designed for. So I pulled in some of my Lindsay Stamp Gang Spray, and you can see I can go right over that, and that's not going to move, again, until I put my finger to it. I can force the movement of that pigment. So while they are water reactive, you've got to make them react. But once they're dry, there's certain things you can do. If they're dry and put water over them, they will react. So it's kind of it's a little confusing, but very interesting. So I pulled out some of my stamps and I just did some tags. Now these are just general tags. They're not mixed media tags. They're just tags. These are tags that I use for mixed media that I just have fun with. So how I came up with that technique, and I'm just going to pull in a piece of Bristol paper here. And what I did, take your stencil, scribble over your stencil. You may not go down onto the paperwork. Take a wet baby wipe. Again, get a lot of the moisture out. Have it be damped, not saturated, and then just rub over the stencil. You're going to see you're actually going to move the pigment off the stencil into the open areas. And you even get a little bit of texture because it builds up on the edge of the stencil. If you want to do anything else with this, you need to let that dry. Now, I'm finding if you have a lot of pigment, it takes a while. So here I'm taking another Lindsay stamp, not touching this because it's still damp and I don't want that pigment to move. But you can see I can spray right over top of that when it comes to spray inks. These have been drying for about 2 hours from the time that I created them to the time I started the video. So these are very much dry. Now, some areas were still a little waxy feeling. No wax, just waxy feeling. But because of the spray that I'm putting on, I was okay to put this spray over. So they will stay stable. These are very stable pigments until you move them. So just keep that in mind. Stable, you have to move if you want it to move. And they do give, in my mind, a distress look. So here's some tags where you can see when you put the pigment down, it's very blotchy. Now I've added water to that blue. These again have been drying for 2 to 2.5 hours. I'm still able to move some of that pigment. So on the red one, I put a little bit more pigment down and was able to smudge across it. Again, I could just let the spray alone, but if I take my finger over it, I'm going to even it out. It's not going to give you a solid coverage. So if you're looking for a solid color background, you're not going to get that with these. Now, one thing that you can do is put a layer down, put a stencil on top of that after it's dry, and then just go up in an up and down motion with a twist. You can actually, because you're reactivating that pigment with the moisture in the baby wipe, you can actually remove some of that pigment to give you some more texture or a design on your card background. Now again, these tags or the watercolor paper or the Bristol paper were not treated, meaning there's not some gesso or something on that paper to make it non-porous. So these are porous surfaces that we're working on. Why did I just say that? Because these I have placed gesso. I put a layer. I just buy any type of gesso that's on sale. So I automatically notice that with the gesso, you get more pigment down in a solid sense. You can blend these better. They are already creamy, but they're even more creamier when you have a gesso layer. So again, gesso is like a primer for your acrylics. It makes a surface to adhere to that acrylic, and I know I'm saying that wrong, but it gives a more smoother surface. So here I'm going to put 3 colors down. Now, you may not think you get a lot of pigment in these. You do. The entire tube is filled with pigment, and you don't need that much. Now, you can see I put 2 colors down, and I moved back and forth, and it really blended nicely. I don't get that scratchy look, if you want to call that, as with the other textured papers when I didn't have them primed. So if you're looking to make solid, somewhat solid backgrounds, then you would need to prime your your paper in some way. It's just another way to do that. You don't have to. I like the textured look as well. I like both. Now you can see on a gesso tag using a baby wipe, it really smooths out. It will make the colors softer. They won't be as vibrant as the pure pigment is. So that's what can happen when you have a gessoed base to your project. Here, I put a layer of matte medium down. Now, a matte medium, of course, we've seen that in art journals. I use that for my art journals when I'm putting down my focal points or I want to adhere something. They will make your surface non-porous, so smooth. So this, when I put the pigments on, is going to act almost the same as a gesso. I like the look. You can still see the colored paper coming through. It can make them translucent, so if you're putting them over something else, you will see that texture coming through. Now that I have that, now I want to put water on it because I want to see, does it move? It only moves a little bit, but watch. When I move this pigment, it really moves, and I really like that. So you can get almost of a color wash background when it comes to your cards or art journals. This is for both. I believe mixed media should be part of card making. You guys have seen that before with me. So now I'm just putting 3 different colors here, and I'm going to go across and I'm going to blend them and I'm going to bring it down. I want to make sure before I go down into my yellow that I do clean my, either switch or clean my finger, but you do get a very nice blend. It looks solid. Again, what I call scratchy. So on the next one, we're going to see how these two, and I have them down a little bit further, and now we're going to use a baby wipe. So you really want your baby wipe to be very dry because you can see how much that pigment comes up. So I would even wring it again to get as much moisture as you can. So that was on a matte medium surface. Doesn't have to be for glue. Now this here, I'm using texture paste. So I used one of my stencils. Now texture paste is just that. For me, it feels gritty when it dries. So you're going to have texture in there. So I'm just going to take some pigment and just scribble right across it. And only with my finger, I'm going to move this along and see what type of an effect I get. Now, of course, as I'm going across, you still have some of that pigment in there, but it does bring out and it colors the texture paste. I'm going to do it again with the next color, except this time I'm going to spray it first. Again, it's not moving until my finger goes on it. Now I'm forcing it to move. So you're able to clean up some of those areas that you went across a little bit better. But again, they add depth of pigment. And you can see you can almost get that texture paste up to white and the color goes down onto the card. So if we do this again, and I'm using a very light pressure when it comes to putting the pigments over this. Now I'm using a baby wipe and I'm really able to move that. I'm making the textured paste colored where it's not going down to the paper so much as in the previous one that I did. So again, that was using a texture paste because that does, again, to me it has a little bit of a grit to it, so it captures. So I made these prior, and basically what this is, and I will be showing you, you take your pigments just like we did in the first example with the alphabet stencil. We used a baby wipe. You don't have to use a baby wipe. You could go directly stencil, crayon, rub it in with your finger, just like I'm going to do right here. So again, this is a piece of Bristol, and it's the same for the watercolor. So I'm going to put 3 colors on this. I want to see if I can get a blend. You can always see that it stays on top of the stencil, but look, when you blend it down, your finger is actually pushing it. As long as it's an open stencil, you're pushing it down onto the paper. And you get this very interesting design. Now again, I made these about 2.5 hours prior, and there were still sections that were damp, which means they're going to move. The reason why I'm emphasizing this is one of the things that these are great for is if you have a thin layer of this medium, the Distress Crayon, and it's dry. So I'm just going to look at the edges, not the center, because you can see I have a concentrated amount of pigment there. You can take your Distress inks and blend over it, and it's not going to move. You can see that this pigment, the Distress Crayon, is not moving with and from my blending tool, and I'm able to put my vintage photo right over the edge of that. That is one of the beauties. These are designed to literally dry so that you can do these. I didn't go over the center because it would have smudged. Because of the force of the blending tool, it would have moved that pigment. So again, I'm just wetting my finger with the Baby White, and you can see I was able to reactivate that purple pigment. So again, they can be reactivated, but they are mainly let them dry and then do something over it. What I also love about these, so those are the general techniques, art journaling, mixed media type thing. But how can you use these for your cards? If you grab an acrylic block, it doesn't have to be something slick. Could be a plate, whatever it is. Just make sure you can see your colors. And you just scribble some of this pigment down on that. I had heat embossed some tags as well. And this is my recollection snow. And again, this is not watercolor paper. This is just regular tag paper. Okay, whatever these tags are made of. I make tons of tags. I love making tags. I'm going to use my water brush. I'm going to activate these pigments with my water brush. We can now create a palette, and you can paint with these. You're going to get a very different look than the Distress inks, than watercolors, because these are creamier. So they may be close to, you know, a creamy watercolor. You know, there are out there, like I know the Primas are like that. I've heard a lot of people say that they're creamier in the consistency. But you can see that you're able to watercolor with these. You're able to drop other colors into the wet areas or the water areas. The pigment will travel just like a watercolor. Now there I'm just pulling up some of the water. I had a lot of water in there actually. So here I'm just going to watercolor up these leaves. You can use these to create splatters. When they dry though, they do dry pastel. So the more water, it's just like with a watercolor, the more water you add to them, the more pastel or lighter they will be. So they won't be as vibrant as what the pure pigment is. So you just want to keep that in mind. So you can see those colors when they were down on my acrylic block, you know, very vibrant. But now that I'm putting them down on the card, they're gradually getting lighter. They're drying, so they're going to get lighter, as I keep saying. Okay, but these, I love what they do when we watercolor with them. These are not, this is not a media where you can put it on a stamp and spray it and then stamp it. You're not going to get your stamp. It's not going to be the watercolor effect. So it's not like if you saw one of my previous videos where I use the oil pastels that are water soluble, where I'm able to draw on the stamp, spray it, and it activates and I get an impression. That you cannot do. So these are all the tags and the different techniques that I'm showing you of what you can do with Distress Crayons. I will never say one product is just for art journaling, mixed media, and not for card making, because I can believe we do anything we want with cards. So I hope this helped you. to understand the properties of a distress crayon. So when it comes to this last one, this is just something that I wanted to see if it was possible. I wanted to have some of the pigment, get a little tiny of, you know, spatula there or whatever, a palette knife. And I wanted to spread that. I'm sure you've seen my other videos where I do this with mousse. I wanted to see if I can do that with these. I was able to get the pigment onto my palette knife. It spreads absolutely beautiful. Now this tag is treated with gesso, so I believe this will work very well with any paper, but it may be easier with a gessoed paper or a matte medium down first or collage medium, whichever one you have. And you can see as I'm spreading this, it's blending because I'm crossing over between the two colors. I really like that look. I think that would be absolutely gorgeous on a card. But now I'm going to take a stencil and I'm going to take my baby wipe, clean area, and I'm going to lift the product. And I wanted to see what that looked like. So you can use a palette knife to spread it. It doesn't take much of the pigment onto the palette knife. But you can see you get a great design. So even using an acrylic paint, underneath that you can get the colors to come through. So they will layer on top of other items as well. Now I do have the entire collection of these. All the colors are out. I believe there is one color that's missing. There's always, when he comes out with new products, one missing. So here I'm just pulling in all the different tags that we did to play around with it. I do encourage you, if you have these, give these techniques a try or come up with your own techniques. Let's see how the product can work for you. Just because it has certain properties doesn't mean we cannot create a card or anything else we want to with these products. Make it work for you. If you like this video, hit the thumbs up. If you haven't already subscribed, please do so. Again, this is part or segment or video 1 of the technique series. There will be more to come. And after every technique, I will show you a card with using this product. Remember, everyone, always be creative.